2023 is drawing to a close, and overall I would say it's been a great year for Path of Exile. We've had Crucible, Ancestor, and Affliction, so you could say it's gotten off to a slightly rough start, but ended on a banger. Because this year only had 3 leaks, as opposed to the 4 from most previous years, I'm going to be going over a condensed number of builds and highlighting the 3 that truly stood out to me. Is this the most objective list ever? No, absolutely not. These are my favorite builds, and the ones that I think performed the best from the past year. Now, some of them are things you can play literally right now. You could log into Affliction and play one of these builds. 2 of them, actually. And some of them are, unfortunately, not really playable. But I wanted to highlight it anyway, since it's something I had a lot of fun with. Before I get into things, I want to encourage you to also post your favorite builds down in the comments below. Whether it's something that you use to finally defeat an Uber boss, or just get to tier 16 maps, or maybe it's a playstyle that really resonated with you and was a ton of fun, even if the build didn't end up being good. And if you want to see what builds I'm playing in 2024, well, do be sure to get subscribed, leave a like while you're down there, and for now, let's get into things. Starting with build number 1, Poison Spark Pathfinder. This was my first experience really playing a build that leveraged Blood Notch as part of its defenses, and it felt completely insane. Recovering based on an enemy's hit is wonderful. It makes you feel completely invincible, since to small hits you are. Now, I did have some previous experiences with this using Aegis Aurora. That doesn't apply to every hit because it's block, and also using something like Recover Life when you suppress spell damage from Elevor. Neither of those came close to how Blood Notch felt. Once you got a well-rolled Immutable Force, you never noticed the stuns at all, and Spark had insane coverage with projectile speed scaling. Unfortunately, that's where the first part of his build falls apart in terms of a modern day. You no longer get that projectile speed scaling since it relied on alt quality gems. And then the clear was incredibly fluid because Azaneth's and Prolif cleaned up anything that survived the initial volley. Poison Prolif builds, Ignite Prolif builds, Explodey builds, those are all things that tend to feel really good and have featured many times in my top favorite builds, so it's no surprise that Poison Spark ended up here as well. And I had a lot of fun crafting the gear for this one, finding ways to squeeze out just a few stats here or there by dropping Diadem for an incredibly expensive Fractured Delve helmet. Did you need to do it? No. Was it a blast to do it? Absolutely yes. Leveraging Adziri's Reflection with Curse scaling to make sure my poison stayed on the enemy for the longest time possible, and overall just working things in what felt like a completed puzzle, shifting pieces here and there to get an awesome end result. The downside of that, of course, being that it was easy to mess the character up, especially while you're putting it together for the first time. Now, for me, that is not a glitch, that is not a flaw, that is an intended feature, because that's what I enjoy most in Path of Exile. I can go through maps, I can kill bosses, and all that's fine. But what really keeps me coming back to Path of Exile, day after day, or league after league, is the build crafting aspect, and also just the crafting in general. That's what I enjoy, and Poison Spark Pathfinder provided an avenue for that creativity. Now, in addition to that, I originally played the build in Crucible, but I maintained it all the way through Trial of the Ancestors, since very little changed. If anything, the tattoos made it even better. Unfortunately, you can't really play it now. Well, you can, but the cost to entry has gone up. To get your project speed back, you're going to have to invest pretty much everywhere. And to get your Chaos conversion back, you need to use Original Sin, which then limits your ability to interact with enemy resistances. In some cases, that's fine, and in other cases, that's severely detrimental. So not only has the price gone up a lot, but the effectiveness has gone down a lot. And with so many other good Poison Pathfinder builds existing, in fact, there's even one that made it into my top 3 builds, so I'll talk about that later, I really can't advise doing this anymore. Now, like I just mentioned, I very much value a sense of fluidity when it comes to my builds, and the Cast on Crit Energy Blade did that almost flawlessly. I like Cast on Crit builds, which is why they're featured frequently in my top builds from previous years. This was a little different though, because I've never done Energy Blade, I've never done Spell Blade, and I've never done stat stacking Cast on Crit. I've done stat stacking before, and I've done Cast on Crit before, but I never combined the 2 concepts. The idea of scaling everything through one singular method is really appealing. How do you get more defenses? Scale your ES via Strength and Intelligence. How do you get more damage? Scale it via Strength and Intelligence. Want to cap your crit? Yep, that's Strength and Intelligence as well. If I could have found a way to work into attack speed scaling via Strength and Intelligence, I'm sure I would have. Unfortunately, that's slightly out of reach of a Templar build. Or at least it was last league. Now with charms, I think you could actually do it, which is kind of insane, and you could get to the 10 APS breakpoint. The only downside of this is a lot of your items are uniques. You're going to be using the Wrathpith Globe. That's a shield that uses your life to scale both your spell crit and spell damage. Since you get a lot of life from having strength, this is a great way to boost your damage. You're going to use Ivory Tower to reserve that life, thus granting Energy Shield, which again, works really well. Intelligence scales your ES. Strength scales your life. Oh, and Strength also scales your ES because of Shaper's Touch. Which means a lot of these pieces of gear were very easy to get and relatively inexpensive as a barrier to entry. Unfortunately, the very few rares and things like the amulet the build was using were quite expensive, so it wasn't necessarily the easiest thing to put together in a fully functional version. With that said, there's also a downside to everything scaling together. And that is, if you don't have enough strength and intelligence, not only will your damage suck, but your defenses will feel awful as well. So with everything working synergistically, there are upsides and there are downsides. And even if I didn't have quite as much fun assembling the Exodia that is this build's puzzle, since I didn't get to craft too many items, it was really awesome to go in and test multiple skills. I could try Cast on Crit Firestorm and find out that it's utterly blinding, or Purifying Flame, or Eye of Winter, Ice Spear, Arc, Shock Nova, Blazing Salvo, anything you want. I could just stick on a random spell. I ended up mostly going with switching between Eye of Winter and Blazing Salvo, and using a Nimbus to do even more damage for Uber Boss melting in seconds levels of DPS. Which, by the way, is even higher now. There's a slight downside to using a bunch of different skills, which is you didn't get to 100% optimize around one, i.e. if I'm putting Nimbus on, then taking it off, I'm losing the dexterity and can't use Sniper's Mark. But if I'm killing an Uber Exarch in 12 seconds, I honestly don't care that much about how much DPS Sniper's Mark would theoretically give me. And while we have lost alt qualities, which in some cases was a nerf to some of the skills that I mentioned, between Transfigure Gems, the fact that charms are absolutely insane, you can get like 40 strength and int for free per charm, so 120 more, plus all the scaling from increases, blah blah blah, well, the build is better than ever. Oh, and it's also just really fun to see myself with 22,000 Energy Shield. That used to be a thing way back in Path of Exile's past, and then it was nerfed for a long time, where you'd have more like 8,000 or 9,000 Energy Shield, and now you can get to those absolutely ridiculous numbers. I think Captain Lance has taken it even further. So I'm very glad to see that this archetype exists. I also think it's nice that there's something that's a little simpler to build for Cast on Crit, because as long as you're following the unique item puzzle, almost everything else automatically falls in place, leaving you with a build that is functional in tier 16s. And if you've played this or anything similar to it in the recent past, let me know what Transfigured Gems you think would be most awesome. I might even make a video where I go onto Standard, spend a bunch of money, and test that in the future. Then last up, the third build I want to talk about is my Caustic Arrow, Scourge Arrow of Poison build from the current league. This is easily the tankiest bow build I've ever played. Adding in Defiance of Destiny and a Micro Distillery belt enhanced per Genesis feels incredible. Scourge Arrow of Menace and Caustic Arrow of Poison have also been great mapping skills, easily blasting through 6,000 to 7,000 Wisp Juice tier 16s with Beyond or Delirium, and I barely even noticed the speed difference. Unfortunately, I did often notice the difference in my frames when using Scourge Arrow of Menace, which is why I swapped to a more single-target focused Caustic Arrow of Poison. Now, I haven't set this up to really be a bosser. I'm sure it is fully capable of it, and I have killed Uber bosses on it, but that's just not how I've been playing the build. I've been going for things like Prod Speed and Movement Speed, which are really helpful in mapping, and can honestly, at least in terms of movement speed, be detrimental when fighting Uber bosses. I also haven't done anything to mitigate elemental penetration on enemies. Is it a thing when I'm mapping? No. Is it a thing when bossing? Yes. Many Uber bosses have 15 or 25% pen built into their skills, so ideally you want to mitigate it. So if you're tired of playing Tornado Shot Deadeye, or want a mapper that's both high damage and tanky, I can very much recommend this build. It uses the Blood Notch and Immutable combo, which I mentioned earlier in the video, then adds Defiance of Destiny for even more hit damage ignoral. Is that even a word? Ignoration? Ignoring? Ignorance? Let me know down in the comments which one fits best. But what it means is, if the hit doesn't kill me outright, it's never going to, because I'm just going to out-heal it forever. Oh, and recoup on top, because who doesn't want to be extra tanky? Normally, a poison bow build like this would be limited by the relatively low DPS on the unique bow Darkscorn. The bow makes you quite a bit tankier, but taxes your DPS since it only has so much damage. Luckily, in this case, instead of going for a 300 to 400 unique bow, I'm going for a 1,300 LE DPS bow, which is another good way to get all the DPS along top of all the defenses. I don't know if this is going to stick around, but if you do enjoy this kind of playstyle and want to check it out, I have several videos that I'll link up in the card and down below. Because this is the League starter that I played for Affliction, I have all the information easily documented, and you can check things out for yourself. But now I wanted to go over a few honorable mentions, or more accurately, the other builds that I've played. In Crucible, I also played a Righteous Fire Juggernaut. The reason I didn't want to talk about this is because it was fine. It was definitely fun, but it was really no more or less fun than the last time I played RF, and it's changed a lot since. So unless I play Righteous Fire of Arcane Devotion, I'm probably not going to be talking about RF that much in the near future. In Trial of the Ancestors, I played one other build. My League starter was a Cold Dot Elementalist that also used Blood Notch, and while it did feel really good, it's not going to feel the same now, which is why I don't think it quite makes the cut, because I only wanted one build that's a true blast from the past. Over the past year, I've kind of been making less builds, but spending more time on the builds I make. Not only more time in terms of on the character itself, because I kind of always did that, but more time documenting the character, doing things like how to craft Unrighteous Fire, or the mechanics behind why the Poison Scourge Arrow build is the way it is. So if you like that, keep an eye out for multiple videos on a topic, as I'll try to cluster the adjacent topics together and release the videos sequentially. Hopefully this provides a more fulsome picture, rather than just here's the build, here's the POB, GG, go. And so those are the top builds that I played in 2023, along with a few things that stood out to me as interesting aspects of how I made them, or at the very least how the build interacted with the world of Rayclast. But again, I'm very curious what some of your favorites are. Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. Before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. For $5 a month, you can see your name on screen just like these fine folks here. Link to support is also down below. If you've been around on my channel for a while, you'll notice that I've been making a little bit less Path of Exile content and playing other games. That's because I enjoy playing a wide variety of games, and I hope to do that even more in 2024 and beyond. So if there's anything that interests you, stay tuned and also let me know. I'll see you again in 2024.